Hi, my name is Judy Niemeyer, and I am the #1 instructor for Quiltworx.com. And today I'm going to show you how to do the binding on a tea time placemat. A few things I want to tell you before we get started is in your instructions, we tell you to cut a 2.5-inch strip on the bias and use those pieces to put the binding on, okay? The other thing about the instructions is it tells you to cut part of those pieces from this color out here, and the other part is from whatever color you have on this side of your placemat. So if you guys want your binding to be a different color, you're gonna have to adjust your yardage to make it so that it'll go all the way around. You still have to do it in 2 steps, like what I'm going to show you. The other thing I want to explain to you is today we're actually going to use a single layer binding instead of a 2.5-inch strip. I cut this at 1 3/16. 1 1/8 is too small, or I should say 1 1/4 is too small. And if you cut it at 1 1/2 inches, it's just a little bit too big and it doesn't fold over properly around the points. So that measurement you're going to have to remember from this video because it's not in the pattern. Now, whatever way you choose to do your binding, it's going to be okay. It turns out both ways, all right? The other thing you're going to have to do is if you cut your binding according to what's left over in how it tells you to do it in the pattern, you're going to end up with a couple seams because they're shorter pieces. They're cut off of a 9-inch strip. So you're going to have a couple seams, and you're going to have to make sure that those seams fit kind of in the middle of your curve so that you don't end up them falling on the ends. So you're going to have to kind of pre-measure that a little bit, okay? The other thing I'm going to show you is when I use a single layer binding, what I do is I fold this in half like this, and the only time I use a single layer binding is when I'm actually doing something around a curve, okay? If I'm doing a straight edge, I always just do the 2.5-inch bindings. So we're going to fold this in half, and I like to press that so it leaves a crease right down the middle of my binding. Then I'm going to move the leaf and put this on the table. Then I take and I fold the 1/2 where I'm going to start sewing. I fold that and I press that. You only have to do like the first 5 inches on this one. You don't have to press it in the whole thing because it's just to help us get started and to make sure that we have an equal seam allowance as we go around this inside curve, right? So the first thing you're going to need to do this, a couple things. You've got to have your binding. You need a glue pen, and you're going to want a little pair of applique scissors. Now, if you don't have an applique set of scissors with the curve in it, you can use a straight edge. You'll just find these are a little bit easier to cut your curves. So I'm going to take my glue pen, and I'm going to run this glue right along the edge of my placemat. Now, I did a pre-basting stitch around the edge because that helps it lay flat for me. I'm going to place this, and I want to leave about 4 inches, 3 to 4 inches along the bottom there. And then I'm just going to start pushing this into the glue, and you're going to have to pull a little bit on the outside curve and then ease the inside in. And you just work it a little bit. It'll actually go. It seems kind of awkward when you're doing it, but it does work. Once you get up towards the top of this curve, then it gets a lot easier to put on. I'm going to actually cut off this little piece right here. Then we're going to finish putting glue along this edge. And make sure you keep that glue within your seam allowance. You don't want it, if you get too much glue outside the seam allowance, you're going to see it and it's going to leave a mess. And then I'm going to go the rest of the way, and this we're going to go all the way to the end. And don't pull too tight on that because it needs to lay down naturally along there. If you get that too tight, then when you go to turn it under to stitch it, it's going to cup kind of like a bowl, and you want it to lay flat. So if it's laying flat now, it's going to work great for you. So this is the way it's going to look. So this is kind of high, and what I have to do is sew in here, and then this just lays down really nice for me. So we're going to go to my machine, and I'm going to place my, before we do that, I'm going to mention something. Now, if you're worried about that coming off, you can actually take and put a couple pins right along this edge, and it'll probably make it a little easier for you to see what I'm doing at the machine. So I'm just going to pin this down. That way it won't move. And the other thing you can do is you can take this to an iron and run a steam iron on that, and it'll take all the little wrinkles out of it. So whenever I'm doing a bias binding, I use my steam iron a lot. I'm not going to right now because I didn't plug it in, so we're just gonna make this work. And I'm gonna move this pin because it just seems to want to pucker just a little bit right through there. So there we go. So I'm gonna take it over to my machine, and I can see that my thread is, my needle is not threaded, so you're gonna have to watch me thread a needle. I think I know how. And no, this little machine, I don't use the needle threader on it because the needle I have in here is a little bit too small for that. Okay, so now we're going to take this, and I'm going to place my needle down, and I'm going to move my needle over, and I think I already have it moved over. And I'm going to bring the needle down and put it right into that crease that I put in there when I ironed that in half. So it's sitting, because I want to make sure that seam's the same size. And after I sew just a little bit, I'm going to be able to see whereabouts my pressure foot is hitting. There we go. Now we're just going to very slowly, and you just kind of want to keep your finger in there and make sure that you're not getting any puckers. Okay, so I'm going to remove the pins now because I don't like working with pins very much. I always poke myself. So now we can just sew pretty fast along this outside edge. Okay, when you get to this end, make sure that you sew right in that crease that you put, the first crease. Okay. So, thread. And now I'm going to clean off those pieces along there. Now I'm going to take my glue stick, and I'm going to run this glue stick just inside the seam allowance along the whole piece. because I'm not going to set down and hand stitch, so I'm going to glue my binding over. So if I do that, then I can get that to lay in there, and this is going to have to, now this is where your steam iron's going to want to come in. So see how wrinkly this is? Well, if you steam that, that's going to pull most of those wrinkles out. Okay, now I'm going to bring it over here, and I'm just going to get this to lay down a little bit. So I'm going to run glue on the back side, and I'm going to fold it under and match it up with my seam allowance. Put a little bit more glue down here, and I'm going to roll this in. Get the wrinkles out. Now we're going to come up and do the top half. And I'm going to glue up and leave about 2 inches unglued at the top. No, actually on this side I have to glue all of it. Sorry about that. We're going to glue the whole thing. Okay, once we get that glue down, now we're going to take our little scissors and we're going to cut this piece nice and clean right along that edge to keep that curve coming up. Actually, I should probably lay it down here so you can see a nice curve there. And then on this piece, we're going to clip it. I need to re-glue that just a little bit. Get that to match up. There we go. Now I'm going to take this and I'm going to clean that off right along the bottom of the leaf. All right. So we're going to get rid of these scraps. Now we're going to put the next piece on. So on this piece, we want to leave about 4 inches down here. And then you're going to bring this up and measure it. And that looks like it's positioned about right. Actually, I'm going to move it down just a little bit more. All right, so that gives me a little bit more room there. So on this piece, I'm going to start right up here, okay? So remember that I said we're going to fold this over. And I thought that I pressed that. I did, so I'm going to use this one. So you can see here where I pressed that earlier, but I'm going to crease it a little bit more. Now I'm going to re-measure it just to make sure that I get it positioned right. Yep. Okay. So I'm going to glue this edge the same as I did before, right along that edge. And we're going to start at the point and then work this down. If you try to glue all of the edge at one time, it's going to dry out before you get down to that. So just, you're going to have to pick up your glue a couple times. I'm going to clean this back just a little bit more. There we go. And then let's go ahead and let's put a pin down along the bottom to secure that, because by the time I get down that far, that's probably going to pop off. The glue will dry. Something I did not mention earlier was when I'm doing a bias binding, and it's a single edge bias binding, I'm going to press my seams open so that there's not as much bulk when I start folding that around. Okay, so I'm going to take and put a couple pins right up in here so that I can get started. All right, so now we have to sew this edge. And again, I'm going to actually show you where that mark is. Okay, so basically I want my needle to start and hit this line right in there. And it's important that you get this even halfway between, because here's my center here. So it's important that you're halfway in between there. Because if you get that really narrow, then you're not going to be able to get that to fold over and match up on the back side. So we're going to sew this side quickly. All right, I'm going to mention one more thing about my machine here, is when I'm doing a bias binding, I normally just use either a 1/4 inch foot or the regular 5/8 seam allowance foot. I don't use a walking foot. If I'm doing a straight edge binding, I always use the walking foot. But whenever we're doing curves, the walking feet just don't seem to roll around a curve as easy as your regular pressure foot. All right, we're going to do the same thing that we did before. We're going to run the glue on the inside of that seam allowance so that I can get this to press over like that. And now I'm going to fold back the back side, fold it under, and I'm going to leave it open about this far on the top, and on the bottom I can fold it all the way over. Now, if you're doing a double-edged binding where you cut it 2.5 inches, it would already be, you would already have a folded edge there that you wouldn't have to do what I'm doing right here. So it does make it a little bit easier when you're doing that. Cut off a couple little hanging threads. Okay, so down, we're going to do the stem first. Some people, before I start with the stem, I want to explain the reason why I'm doing the single edge binding is when I'm working with curves, it just lays down a lot better than a double edge binding. You can do them both ways, but it's just I prefer that whenever I'm doing anything on the bias. Okay. Now I'm going to take this and open it up, and I'm going to run some glue along this edge here. And then I'm going to fold that in to that center fold. Okay. Then I'm going to do the same thing on this side. Put some glue along that edge. I'm going to go up a little bit further. And I'm going to fold this side in as well. And I'm going to fold it over. And I'm going to decide how long I want my stem. And I think I'm going to cut it off about right there. So I'm going to use a straight pair of scissors. I'm going to cut it at a tiny little angle there. And then we're going to come in here. We're going to open this back up. And I'm going to clip off these little dog ears right here. And then I'm going to put some glue right on the end. And I'm going to fold this down like that. And we're going to fold this side down. So we have both sides folded down. Now we're going to glue again. And we're going to fold it back to the center. And we're going to glue this side and fold that one back to the center. Right? Now I'm going to fold these two pieces in half. And if I didn't get an even fold there, then I'm going to come and just change it a little bit. I need to change that angled just a little bit. I'm going to test it. So I actually am folding it down too far is what my problem is. And you can actually draw those lines on there with a pencil to know where you're going to fold. And there we go. Now it looks pretty good. So we'll fold that in. Fold that like that. Now, to finish off this little piece right here, I will just use a needle and thread, and I usually whip stitch that. If you don't want to use a whip stitch on there, you actually can come in with your machine and just sew right along the edge there and get that sewn down. I'm going to cut off this little thread, and then I'm going to put some more glue and glue my end down. I'm probably going to have to mess with the tip just a little bit as I stitch that down. Right. That's the way that piece is going to look. Put some more glue on it. right there. See if that'll hold that down for me. There we go. Now, this side is a little bit trickier, and I've got 2 or 3 stages that I'm going to show you. Right? So the first one, I'm going to put this one up here. And what we're going to do is we have this opened up. So the first thing we want to do is, see, I have this folded over the end here. So I have to fold this over that end like that. All right? And you want that to be folded tight. So I'm going to take and run some glue right on the tip of that. And then I'm going to fold that back. And the glue should hold that in place for me, okay? Now, the next thing I have to do is, I want this, when I fold this back all the way, the idea is to get that angle exactly like that, okay? This is bulky, so the first thing we're going to do now, or I should say the second thing, is after I fold that, I'm going to trim that off. So we're going to have to clean off some excess fabric as we go. So you really only have one chance to get this right. So we have that like that. Now the next thing that I want to do is, I'm going to fold this all the way back like this, and I'm going to flip it over. And when I flip that over, I'm going to draw a line right here. But before I do that, I'm going to trim this excess right there off. So now it looks like I have the same size seam folded over. Okay, so then we're going to fold it all the way back. And see how I have this piece sticking out there? So I'm going to take my pencil and I'm going to draw a line just underneath the edge there. So I kind of know where I have to fold that back. So now when I open it up, I have that line there. And that is perfect. That's a mirror image of where I have to be here. If I just fold this down and fold it over, it doesn't match up the way it's supposed to match up, right? So what I want to do is, I'm going to fold this along that line. So see how I folded that piece in? Just like that. And I matched that line. And then I'm going to fold in like that. And then we fold it over. We got to do that again. So let's try that again. So we have this. Make sure I've got this right, and I do. And then we're going to take this, and I'm going to fold this right on that line. That's what, I had one too many folds in there. So I folded that right on the line. Do you see what I did? And I'm going to just kind of color this area just a little bit. So see what I did there? So now I'm going to put some glue underneath that so it doesn't move on me. And I'm going to fold it back and test it. And look, it folds just exactly the way it's supposed to. See how that's looking? Now, we're going to flip it back over, and I'm going to fold this side in now. So I'm going to take this, put some glue along here, fold this side in, glue that down, and then we're going to come back. And I'm just about perfect there. I'm going to loosen that and go back just a little bit, because I'm not quite reaching that line and I don't want to pull. There we go. That's a better fit, right? So now I'm going to put my glue along this edge, and we're going to fold that in. I'm gonna re-fold right there, glue it. See how nice that looks? All right. Then when I get my needle and thread, I'm gonna stitch it, and I'm just gonna stitch on the back side of that just a little bit, and you won't be able to see the stitches from the top. And what I've just done here is showing you a perfect point for my leaf, and I'm really proud of it.